Welcome back to Newscentre. The festive season has turned out to be a mixed bag for the Indian automotive sector. Sources in the industry tell us that passenger cars reported a solid 40% growth over last year. However, sales have been still below pre-COVID levels for some companies due to production-related challenges. It has, however, been a bumper ride for Maruti Suzuki, India's largest passenger car maker. Sources tell us that Maruti saw a 45% year-on-year increase during this festive season. They retailed around 1.9 lakh cars in the last 1 month and are presently sitting on a strong order book as well. I'm now joined by Shashank Srivastava, Senior Executive Officer of Maruti Suzuki. Mr. Srivastava, thank you very much for joining us. According to estimates, the industry retailed approximately 400,000 cars since the 26th of September, the first day of Navratri, to Bhai Dooj. What would be your estimate? Are the numbers higher?
Yeah, so I think it's a fairly good estimate. The festive season started with the first Navratra on 26th of September, and officially it closes with the Bhai Dooj, which was yesterday. So in this period, estimates are 400,000 sale for the industry. Maruti Suzuki, as you rightly pointed out, 1.92 lakhs. So that's an increase over last year. Last year, the sale deliveries for Maruti was about 1.36 or 1.37 lakhs. So that's more than a 40% growth. So that's a good growth to look back. But as you also rightly pointed out, less than what we saw in the pre-COVID period in the same festive period.
Right. We have also been hearing from the industry that the demand for entry-level segments continues to be under stress for two-wheelers and the passenger car segment as well. Would that be right for Maruti Suzuki?
If you look at the entry-level segment, it has, as a percentage of the overall sales in the industry, come down. In fact, that has been the trend the last couple of years. So in that sense, it's correct. But if you look at the absolute volumes for, it's still quite large, still around 35-36% of the overall industry. So that's, if the industry is expected to touch around 3.8 million this year, so almost 35% of that would be small cars. So in that sense, it's a very large volumes, and Maruti Suzuki obviously has a very large market share, in excess of 70% actually in that segment. So in terms of overall absolute volumes, it is still extremely large segment for us.
Right. Do you expect this demand momentum to continue, Mr. Srivastava? What is the overall order book right now?
So for Maruti Suzuki, it's around 440,000, and the estimate in the industry is roughly 8.25 lakhs. So out of which 4.4 lakh is Maruti Suzuki. It's a fairly healthy pipeline of bookings. But remember, the industry has struggled to have production in line with this demand pattern. And that is one of the reasons why I thought that the retails could have been higher during the festive season. So on one side, there was a tailwind because of the better availability of semiconductor and hence larger production, which enabled these large numbers in the last few months, including the festive season. On the other hand, there has been a constraint as well still of around 5% for some of the models, for which explains why you see such a large number of pending bookings. Now, going forward, when you say what is the trend going to be, I think we have to watch out for it's sort of a mixed signals that we are getting. So we have to watch out for a large number of macroeconomic factors, including the GDP growth, which is very closely related. The auto industry growth is very closely related to that, as also the interest rates, which after some lag would start building up in the retail finance rates, which so far hasn't happened, even though the repo rates have increased. So I think we have to watch some situations like that and also see when the increased production happens, what was the fundamental nature of the bookings that are reflected, which are admittedly quite large.
Right. So on the whole, would you say that this festive season has met expectations, or was it below expectations for Maruti Suzuki, considering this is being considered as a record production year, record sales volume year for passenger cars?
Yeah, so I think roughly it was in line with expectation. However, considering that in the same period of time, we have seen the pre-COVID years 206 to 210,000 deliveries against 1.92 that you saw this year. I would say partly because of the production constraint, these numbers could have been and should have been higher.
Right. To what extent were you constrained with production, Mr. Srivastava, if I were to ask?
Yeah, so that's reflected in the pending bookings that we have. And that pending bookings have built up largely because of the constraints in production over the last few months. And that's one of the reasons why I'm saying that going forward, once the production normalizes and we are able to supply vehicles in large quantities in the models where currently there is waiting, we will get to know the exact situation. And we are very closely monitoring the fresh inflow of bookings, which is a much better indicator than the pending bookings, which is suggesting probably giving a slightly misleading picture.
Right. Mr. Srivastava, do you expect the chip situation to perhaps worsen because of recent US export restrictions on semiconductors and semiconductor products to China? Do you feel that the pipeline of semiconductors could be affected once again?
I don't think so, although we are still making that assessment. But it's only got better over the months, the last few months, and we are just around that 95% mark as far as our planned production is concerned. So for the balance, we are not able to give any clear date when it will become 100% normal because the visibility of the semiconductor component availability is not there for the long term. So we keep getting an updates every week, and that's how we keep varying our projections.
Right. We have seen some strong demand for cars like the XUV 700, the Creta. We've also been hearing of strong demand for cars like the Alto, Wagoner, Baleno, which according to you were the hot sellers for Maruti Suzuki during this festive period. And what about the new product from the Maruti stable, the Vitara?
Yes, so actually not just for Maruti Suzuki, but for the industry. Just to give you a perspective, the top-selling vehicle for September was the Alto with 25,000. Second was Wagoner with just above 20,000. Third was Baleno with just under 20,000. And then the Brezza with just above 15,000 numbers. So this is actually the industry number, not just Maruti Suzuki. It just happens that the top 4 models in the industry were from Maruti Suzuki. And during the festive season, the top selling vehicles were Wagoner, Baleno, Swift, and the Brezza. So they have given some extremely good numbers, and that reflects a continuing trend that we saw in September numbers as well.
Right. If I were to ask you about rural versus urban sentiment during this festive season, what was the trend that you really saw?
It was fairly secular in terms of the geographical divide. However, there were pockets, especially in rural areas, in some of the states where the rainfall has been a little scanty. So while on the overall level, the monsoon seems to have been good. However, if you look at the statewide numbers, figures, in some certain areas, there is expected to be a shortfall in both the Kharif output as well as the Rabi sowing. So we saw a mix, but really, if you look at the macro level of urban versus rural, it's a fairly secular result that we see.
Right, and finally, what are you seeing a lot of cancellations when it comes to the entry-level buyer? What about CNG cars? Have they been under stress also for the past few weeks?
For the past few weeks, we have seen a fairly stable inflow for CNG, a little less than the peak that we saw in Q1, but still above the last year's number. And of course, partly also explained by the fact that we have also introduced some new models with CNG, the Swift being the case, which we did in the first week of August. So yes, we haven't seen any unusual cancellation either on the whole or specifically in the CNG. And I also forgot to mention the last question for the Vitara, where we have seen some extremely good response with 75,000 bookings being crossed. And the sales seem to be pretty good in October as well. We started the sales in September, as you know.
Okay, how many have been delivered so far?
So around the 10,000 numbers.
Of the Vitara?
Yes. So it 4,700 or 800 was the number, if I remember correctly, last month. And the trend continues to be strong.
Okay, 75,000 bookings for the Vitara, 10,000 delivered so far. Thanks very much for joining us, Mr. Shashank Srivastava. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of News Centre. News continues on CNBC TV 18. Stay tuned.